It's the Classic Lounge with Zibi and Yinka, and Chico's here.
That's right, great to be here. It's not my first time in the lounge.
No, it's not.
Nice to have you here, Chico.
Good to have you here, Chico. And we have a special guest in the studio, His Excellency, former Governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke, is in the studio with us. How are you today, sir?
Hi guys, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
Having fun.
Yes. It's good to have you here. We have loads and loads of questions. If you have any questions,
Just a few.
yourself,
Why loads? Just a few.
just a few. If you have any questions yourself, you can tweet at us at ClassicFM973, or you can text on 33973, or you can send a WhatsApp message. The number is 0909 217 2973. That's 0909 217 2973. Right? So,
All right, let's dive straight into
let's
it.
get in.
All right, sir, you're running for the presidency of this country. Question is, why?
My question is, why not? Now the reason is this. If you think you can make a difference and you hold back, then you're shortchanging your country and you are failing to remedy a situation that you could have bettered. I look at this country, I've been involved in it, I've been involved in governance at one level or the other. I see the problems, I know the obvious solution, and got smart that we're still applying failed solutions, right, to current problems. We're not the first country to aspire to develop. There are templates that you can draw from across the world. The experiences that we have gathered locally, but we lack the will to make it happen. Vision, you can buy a vision. You can even buy a strategy, but will is innate. If you don't have it, you can't give it, and that's a problem with Nigeria. So, but the summary or the short statement to it all is: as long as you have a nation as large as ours, 200 million people or thereabout, who are hardly productive, then you can be sure that you're going to have a lot of problems, which is evidencing throughout our country today.
Let me just come in. There's a word. It's that's been used. It's come up. I've seen it in a number of places on social media. I look at the word, and every time I read it, I smile. And I want to get your reaction to that word. The word is kakistocracy. And kakistocracy is defined as a system of government which is run by the worst, least qualified, or most unscrupulous citizens. Now, I just wonder, we are careful being on the radio. These are our leaders, it's the government, you want to be careful, but isn't it curious how you can have so much, yet have so little for so long? Like
Another way of putting it, kakistocracy. When you started kakistocracy, right?
Yes.
I thought it was government of kaki by kaki. But another way of putting it is, scum rises to the top, right? And that's evident in what's happening to Nigeria, because we are not involved. We're not sufficiently involved in our polity, and we're not discerning enough in our polity, and there's pervasive poverty. And where there's pervasive poverty, reasoning is the first thing that is thrown out of the window. Then sentiments set in. So you want to identify with someone whose language is similar to yours, or who you understand, or who prays the same way with you and all that, and not the objectivity of who can perform. And that's what has held us back for a long time. I mean, one of the most silly things I hear in politics is, there's this zoning arrangement, which is unconstitutional, by the way, or the North has not finished its turn. I said, well, no one is going to hand over power to you. You've got to take it. You've got to put yourself forward. But you see, you can't play a game of musical chairs, North and South, East and West, when we're in such dire straits. If you're in a medical emergency, you're not going to ask that your doctor should come from this type, from this religion. You're going to be dealt with. You want the best to deal with you, and that's where we are. So we hold ourselves back on the basis of sentimental decisions. Let me before I get off, let me just say this: if you have a family, if all of us here are family, we love each other and all that, but we're very poor, we're dirt poor, and it's mealtime, and the food is inadequate to go around. That's when you're going to know who the lady is, who the first child is, who the last child is, because you've got to use what you've got to get what you want.
Yes.
So if you've got to use your gender, you've got to use your spacing amongst the kids and all that. And so inadequacy is one of our biggest problems. So we've got to deal with that. But I think we are in a situation right now where things are so bad, and they've got to try hard. I tell folks, I'm not afraid to fail. I'm afraid not trying at all. So it's easier to sit back and say, well, they say it's the time of the North. The poverty of the North is not different from the poverty of the South. The challenges of this country, North, South, East, West, we're the same. And now we're becoming an embarrassment, not just to ourselves, we're a threat to our neighbors. Not too long ago, the wife of the Deputy Prime Minister of Cameroon was kidnapped by Boko Haram that originates in Nigeria. The 10,000 troops from the United States, Britain, France, and Germany stationed between Mali, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, trying to contain the fallouts of Boko Haram. So we're becoming an international nuisance. Migration and all that, 25% of the migrants come from Nigeria, and we're not doing anything about it. This is a sad story.
Can we go back to zoning, because I strongly believe that a lot of Nigerians see themselves as a tribe first before seeing themselves as Nigerians, and you hear it a lot of the time. So zoning must play some part in how we move forward. We have to recognize how tribe, plays a part in a collective Nigeria. Don't you see any place for zoning at all?
No, I don't. Maybe when I got into politics, I wouldn't have afforded the benefits of zoning. See, zoning is just, it's a very calculating thing done by politicians to bring advantage to themselves. So if I zone, I say I zone to the north. And when you go to the north, they zone to the northeast. You see, they're getting to someone. Then when you get to the northeast, they start zoning to a particular part of the northeast, right? It's calculating, and don't fall into that trap. Our situation, as I said earlier, is so dire, right, that it's so nonsensical to be talking about zoning. You're looking for the best. Actually, the one talking about zoning, I'm from the part of the country that is seen as minority, so we should be shouting zoning. But I now find there's a people from the majority who are shouting zoning, right? Actually, the one looking for the advantage. I'm supposed to come from the least part, but I'm not running as a southerner or a minority or south. That's hogwash. I'm running as a Nigerian, and I'm going to present myself as a Nigerian who understands the challenges of Nigeria and prefers a solution that will take Nigeria out of its rut. Listen, we're in a bad place. We're not even reckoned with any longer in Africa. And there are instances, we're just in the backwater. It's not enough to shout that you have the largest economy in Africa. That's a function of the number of people you have. We're 200 million. The nearest country in terms of population to Nigeria is Ethiopia, and there are 100. So we're twice the number of the next to us. But in terms of productivity, we're the least.
Recently in the United Kingdom, we've seen, first of all, we saw Amber Rudd. Amber Rudd was the Home Secretary. She got herself into a bit of a pickle where she was asked questions in the House. She was asked if there were any mechanisms for reducing or keeping the number of immigrants. It was something to do with that, and she gave wrong information. She was inaccurate. The following day, it turned out that there was. Now, she had to resign. We've seen Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, resign his position because his position was at odds with that of the Prime Minister. We've seen other members of the Prime Minister's of Theresa May's cabinet resign. It's based on principle. I don't know that I have ever heard of anyone in our government saying, you know what, I don't agree with this, and on principle, and step down, or somebody who has let himself down or let his office down, who hasn't delivered on the mandate that they were given, step aside. There doesn't seem to be any sort of system where you have to perform or fall on your sword. And as long as that you've got that, then we can't possibly hope to make any progress.
Because we run a very unscrupulous system, right? Let's just even take the political platforms. And I'm using the word advisedly, I'm not using parties, because they're not ideologically based. So
Right.
Boris Johnson leaves because he does not believe that the ideology of the government of the day regarding Brexit. He
Yes.
doesn't, you know, and he looks at his future, right? If I'm going to remain in politics, then I have to remain true to my beliefs. Here we don't. We don't have, none of the parties are the same. They're just platforms. So if I can't get a opportunity to run on this platform, I'm going to jump onto the other one. Then there's really no compulsion going on. I mean, listen to what's going on today in Abuja, right? There's a siege as we speak in Abuja on the Senate President. I'm not interested in who's right or who's wrong, but your methods are unspeakable in a democracy where you hem the Senate President and he can't leave his home. You run a very unscrupulous system. No one is held accountable for anything. There are no consequences for your actions or inactions. So who's going to resign? They're all there to feed fat. Look at what's going on in the north. Daily, on an average, 30 to 40 people are killed. We report it. Now we've become so immune to death and the pictures of it. We've lost our humanity.
Right.
200 people were killed in Plateau. Before then, 78 people. Those were the ones that made news. In Zamfara, on the average, 30 to 40 people die every day. And there are no consequences. You have a commissioner of police. You have police intelligence officers. You have a brigade command in that state. You have brigade command intelligence officers. You have the SSS. You know, you have the... No one asks them questions. There are no consequences. These people are paid to look after us. And folks coming, you say these folks who come in are foreigners. So you allow foreigners to come in and slaughter us, and there are just no consequences? What sort of nation is this? You know, and to make matters worse, you now have the temerity to come back and say, vote for me, so that I can continue to be slaughtered? No, it's difficult to compare what happens in other parts of the world with what is happening here, because we are not part of the world. We're in our own world.
You've said this a couple of times that, you know, we're in a bad place. You know, our problems are complex. I think every Nigerian would accept that. In terms of finding a way forward, you have to take baby steps to get to a final destination. Where would you start? Where do you think is the best?
I think the
place?
problem is that
Exactly. He took the words out of my mouth. I was actually going to say,
where do you start from?
if you succeed, let's say you get to Asu Rock,
Yes.
you're going to have to deal with this system and with these people. These people are in situ. They are there.
Yes.
You know, where does one start really? There
There
are
are two
many
things.
of us
There
believe.
are two things.
Yeah.
You know, okay, you can't do baby steps. You've really got to do giant leaps because you don't have time. Okay, baby
Okay.
steps, maybe 20, 30 years ago you could have done that. Now, leaps and bounds. But there are a few things you could deal with immediately. First of all, institute a government of consequences. So if there's a security challenge where people are killed in such large numbers and all that, or there's robbery or this, you're answerable. Okay? That's not a difficult thing. That is just, and ought to be a norm. Then start addressing the productivity of Nigerians. Start ensuring that people can go up and do their own business. There's no way you can employ everyone. So people should be able to fend for themselves and create an environment, and you've got to deal with your credits. I can't go to a bank today and say I'm going to get 100 million naira and I want to set up a radio station. The interest rate makes it impossible, right? So make credits available and affordable. Deal with your power thing. And the power thing is not rocket science. On one end, you're flaring so much gas. Gas is a fuel. You're flaring about an equivalent of 25 million liters of diesel daily, which is about 2.5 billion cubic feet of gas. Pipe that gas, distribute it throughout the country, get the industries to get off the national grid and go on to gas, so that you free gas for domestic and small-scale enterprises. This you can do in 3 years. And the question is, why haven't we done it? Because we don't have the will. We're still doing the same things we did in the 50s. ECN, Electricity Corporation of Nigeria, where one entity generates, transmits, and distributes. You've got to break it up. It's a huge country. In 1959, we were a small country. Most of us were in our rural areas. We didn't think of power and all that. Only the big cities, Kano, Lagos, Ibadan, that were considering. Now everybody knows the value and wants it, of power. So we need to change the way the country is run, but we need to institute consequences. That's the biggest issue we have in our country. No one is answerable to anyone. So the president gets up and goes to Benue and says, oh, I told the Inspector General of Police to be here until this is resolved, and you know he doesn't come in and nothing happens. Of course, everyone is reading the president's body language. The defense minister says that because it's an anti-grazing law, that makes it justifiable for foreigners to come into your country and slaughter people. It's unheard of. But, so where do you start from? Institute consequences and deal with the productivity of Nigerians. And believe me, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, what we'll be talking about will be things of the past.
Just to buttress that point. That the will you talk about, because I think
wants to answer.
I know she does. But I just want to.
The men are bullying. Those two men have dominated this environment, and I believe in gender equality. I want to assure you that Donald Duke's government will have all 50-50. You see, the women form 52% of our population, right? And if you don't give them space, as you guys are doing right now, if you don't give them space, you're shortchanging yourself.
Go ahead.
I've asked you, I'm on your side. So
Yeah.
Don't be hard on me.
I will be nice. I'll try.
Okay.
You've been very prominent on social media recently, and it's about 6 or 7 months before the elections. How can you get to the masses, the grassroots, who are not on social media in this time?
I'm here. This is radio, right? It's not social media.
Right.
It's traditional media. So we're talking. We've also got to stump. We've got to go around the country and do the stumping, and real hard stumping, where we're going to literally every community in the state. The traditional campaign methods have to be done. The social media, which is a more modern means of communication, so everyone counts. Each one has its market. Right. Social media is more of the younger people and all that. For the traditional stumps, you've got to do it, and we intend to do that.
Do you think you can make a lot of progress with that, with this short time frame that you have?
Absolutely. Who is stumping out there? You see, let me tell you something about politics. Timing is everything. If you start stumping very early, in the Americans, they start stumping like 2 years to the elections and all that, because they have the resources to sustain it for that long. If you start this and you'll fall, you'll be so broke. So everything is kept. It's the last 6 months that matters, okay? But we are doing what we ought to do in our program of action.
Okay.
I think to see a change, you said earlier, you have to have the will. Which I think for me, I've always said that's the key. Do you think that will comes from the leader or from the people? And
the leader must have the will.
Right.
The people must be determined to make a difference. That, I think, we're there or getting there. And we saw it evidently in 15, and I think it's still there. But you must have a leader who knows what to do and is determined to do it. Okay, the authority invested in a governor or a president is enormous. Is absolutely enormous. It's a failure of personality if you do not apply that authority to make things work. The Constitution is designed to give you that leverage, and that's why it said that you have an immunity, right? You cannot be sued while you're in office, to give you that authority to make sure things happen. But if you don't rise up to it, and a lot of the times we shrink the office to fit the personality rather than allow the personality to grow in and fit the obvious authority of the office. The leader must have the will, the determination. He must be ready, come hell, come high water, this must happen.
Must happen, yes.
Listen, we are 200 million, and we have all these problems. In 30 years, we'll be 400 million. if we can't deal with these problems at 200 million, I shudder to think of what we will be like when we're 400 million. This country had in 1960, our population was 45 million, right? Barely 60 years after, we're 200. The problems we have today are strange, or would be strange to those who lived in the 60s. And I grew up in the 60s, and I can tell you, I grew up in an era where, you might say this is privileged background, but I tell you, it wasn't. It was just normal for a middle-class family, where milk, right, fresh milk was delivered to your doorsteps every other day. Now it sounds like, and I tell my kids this, and it sounds like, where are you talking about? You know, but we lived in Apapa, we lived on Park Lane, and every other day, a 6-pack fresh milk was delivered by the milkman. Now we've
And you post the letter, it will get to
and it will get there. The post box was about 100 meters away from the house.
Wow.
It was a yellow steel box, you know, no, a red steel box, and you go and post. But today is like Fantasy Island, where, you know, I went to school in Sokoto. I got to Igdo, or put on train, a reserve coach, and we went by train from Lagos to Zaria, and went by bus from Zaria to Sokoto. I was unaccompanied. So we've got to regain our country. Technology, and, you know, sometimes you get frustrated. It's as if we're the first nation striving for development. There's so many templates. People have done it over and over again. But the will to make it happen is just not there.
I have a difficult question.
Throw it
I
on me.
threw the warning out there.
Throw it on me.
So, first of all, my question has 2 parts. The first one is, looking at I'm going to use the word potential candidates, the people who you're up against. Who do you think poses the greatest threat? I don't mean threats to your personally, but who's the greatest competition for you?
Muhammadu Buhari. The reason is simple. He's the incumbent, right? And incumbency in a totalitarian environment, and that's honestly that's where we are. It's very instrumental. Look, on the day of election, the security agencies, everything, they all work for the system, right? They all work for the system. They were appointed by the system, so you're walking against them. The only advantage you may have is getting the mass of the people behind you, right? And so I'm not fairy-eyed and, you know, because people like you. It's more than people liking you. People must want to make that difference. Must come out in the numbers and say, this is what we want. That's the only way you can overwhelm the system, because the system works in his favor. So Muhammadu Buhari by far is my competitor.
In saying that, I'll be honest with you. I followed a number of your interviews. I saw the interview you had with Paul Senji, which I found very interesting, you know, and I watched that. And then I look at the environment where we're at. The truth of the matter is that the number of, I'm looking for a word to describe them as, but I'm going to use the word semi-literate. Those who are cerebral or intellectual enough to understand the argument that you are making, which is a valid one. We do require real change in our country. Somehow, there's no doubt we've lost it. I say to people that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. It's not about rhetoric. It's not, for you to say to me you're doing the right thing, I need to feel it tangibly. As a Nigerian, and it's very difficult to say that one does, but the number of people who are intellectually savvy enough, cerebral enough to assimilate the argument that you're making and the case you're presenting for change are fewer than the number of people who will be seduced by what they call belly infrastructure or whatever it is, who will understand that argument and who won't just go with what's popular. This person who's going to give me a bag of rice today or a fish to eat and I'm satisfied today. And those guys are the majority.
Well, I disagree with you.
Okay.
This was the argument some people put forward in 15,
Yeah.
That you couldn't get rid of the government of the day. They had all the resources. They had the system was working in their favor. But the people stood up and made the change. And I also do not, because I've governed a state that has rural areas too. Don't underestimate those folks. They may not speak English with the flair that you do. Does not make them not know that their lot is not improving. They are suffering a lot more than we are. They know where the shoe pinches. They want things to be different. You know, in 15, in fact, really prior to that, you had this, people clamor and say, oh, in the north they were voting in one direction. But recognize also that the north, particularly the far north, is the poorest section of this country. And government after government, a lot was not improving. Then they had someone who put himself forward as their Messiah and painted a picture of frugality and this and that, and they went for that. It wasn't because he was any northerner running, but they felt he was in sync with their issues. I don't think that passion, for instance, exists today, because 3 years after, they're not better off. Some will tell you that they're worse off. Between 15 and today, over 9-10 million people have lost their jobs. So the country is getting worse off. And even then, he couldn't sell his mantra. I'm talking about Muhammad Buhari now. He couldn't sell his mantra beyond those parts. The real clincher, what happened in 15, was a mass disillusionment, north, central, and south, right? So even in the south, where you could say ordinarily, the southeast, Jonathan had his base, they didn't come out in their numbers because they were disillusioned. He only had about 30% of the votes cast. If he had 60-65%, he probably would have remained as president. And he totally lost the middle belt, you know. So I don't want to underestimate the voters. I want to believe that they are as hard up as each and every one of us is. And the poverty in the north is not so different from the poverty in the south. I think it's even more. And if you can key into them, if you can sell your program and get them to believe in you, it's a marketing thing. You've got to get them to believe in what you do.
Right. We're going to go to the news and wrap up very shortly. We'll be concluding with His Excellency, former Governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke.
Push and make sure that these things happen. You see, when I see presidents assume the position of Minister of Petroleum, I just chuckle to myself. I could tell that these guys they're clowns. That's not where the problem is. If I want to be a minister, if a president should take any portfolio up, it's national planning, right? You want to be in charge. You want to make sure that targets are met. And if a minister is given a target and he fails to meet the target, and all that is required for him to meet the target is given to him, and yet he fails, the consequence is that he loses a job. It's as simple as that, okay? And that's why I come back to consequences. If you have, as Minister of Works, the budget or the program over a space of say 4 years is that you've got to build 5,000 kilometers of highways. The government appropriates and makes the monies available to you, and after a year you've only done 200 kilometers. You can extrapolate from there that for certain you're not going to achieve 5,000 kilometers in a period. So I'll ask you to step aside, right? So, and all those who are responsible in your team, in the ministry, all have to go. But we don't have the luxury of accommodating failure any longer. This is now, we're in a state of emergency. If we don't get it right, I've told him, if at 200 million we're failing and falling all over ourselves like this, when we're 400 million, I wonder what we'll be like. Well, people are still, the jury's out. Are we a failed state or not? A nation that fails to live up to the expectations of her people in the various sector, it's difficult not to call that nation a failed state. but let's see what happens.
All right, we've got.
One second. It's really interesting, and I'm sure there's loads and loads of questions. We could sit here essentially forever, really. But unfortunately, we can't do this.
Chico is a harbinger of bad news.
No, but I'd like to say, do you engage your do you engage people social media wise? Because there's loads of questions that have come in here that I'm sure that our listeners would like to put to you. So if you do, we'd like to have those handles, and then they can direct the questions we don't cover on today's show to you.
Yes, I do. I have to, in modern age, you've got to get involved. And get these guys on, I'm at the cusp between digital and analog. But if you want to keep in touch with me, do follow me on my social media handles. Twitter is @DonaldDuke_Duke. Instagram is RealDonaldDuke. Facebook, RealDonaldDuke. And also Bridging the Gap, my show every week on YouTube, Facebook, and all. And let's keep the conversation going. Thank you, guys.
We will be repeating. Those.
Yes,
We'll be repeating those so that you can get them. And if you did throw in any questions today that haven't been answered, you can tweet or post them on his social media.
When I talk to the establishment, they all work on the premise that Nigerians would just walk away and they would continue doing what they've been doing. Let's all get together, let's make a change, and the real change now, maybe we should have a Twitter handle at realchange.com and not but let's don't give up. If you give up, you're giving up on the future of yourselves, your children, and your generation unborn. So stay involved.
All right, thank you, sir, for coming in. We've been talking to His Excellency, former Governor of Crossroads State, Donald Duke. And if you have any questions, please direct them to him on these handles.